SEMA assesses the risk of copyright infringement claims to Acme Co. for using an LLM to code as extremely low. One reason is it's a very disparate set. There are millions of potential targets. There are millions of organizations who are using LLMs to code. And so the training set provider, it's one thing to go after the LLM, of which there's a handful, but to go after all the users of the LLMs is a very disparate path. Second reason, if you use the right enterprise tier of the LLM, they put in indemnification for proper use.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT One, your analyst for tracking and understanding enterprise technology trends. Our guest today is Matt Van Itallie, founder and CEO of SEMA. SEMA assesses code to improve outcomes for companies by partnering with developers and technologists to uncover legal and regulatory risks, all while increasing productivity. In this talk, we explored how generative AI is being used to dramatically improve coding efficiency and how companies are managing GenAI use by developers. We discussed both the benefits and potential risks of using GenAI to code, and we then explored two new SEMA tools, the Generative AI Code Transparency module, which measures how much GenAI code is in a code base by using predictive analytics, and the Generative AI Bill of Materials module, which helps companies measure and mitigate risks. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, you can email us at team@iot1.com. Finally, if you have a research or strategy initiative that you'd like to discuss, please email me directly at erik.walenza@iot1.com. Thank you.
Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Matt, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Eric, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. This is a topic that I feel like everybody is trying to learn in warp speed. Unlike a lot of technologies where you have time to really see how it develops and it might be a decade-long journey, everybody's kind of jumping right into this one. So thanks for making time. Maybe a good starting point is to understand actually where you came into the topic, because I know you started your company about 7 years ago. And I guess, I don't know if this is true for you, but I think for most people, generative AI was really not on the radar at that point. So would love to understand a bit the origins of your company, and then when did you first start to engage with the topic of Gen AI?
Absolutely. So I was a generalist business executive before I started SEMA, working for investor-backed software companies. And the original inspiration for SEMA is 10 years old now, which is that I was so tired of not understanding what was going on in the engineering department. I like to sometimes talk about CRM tools like Salesforce. Those are fantastic tools for salespeople. They're great for sales managers to help coach and guide salespeople, but they also serve what I call executive insight into sales, which is to say summarizing and contextualizing sales and making it relevant for and understandable for the rest of the C-suite and the board of directors, managing across and up. That's another function of CRM tools like Salesforce. Engineering has plenty, hundreds of thousands, because engineers build their own tools for engineers. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of great engineering leader tools, engineering manager tools. When it comes to a CTO tool or a place that a board of directors can go to get just a summary of what's going on in engineering, or the CEO, the summary, it doesn't really exist. And I've spent a lot of time with data, and I love a challenge that matters. And if you can unblock having engineering leaders and finance and sales and boards talking together, you can achieve so much more. That's what I thought then, and it's most certainly been borne out. So that was the vision of starting SEMA. Because you yourself have an Asia presence, I will also share the story of the name. We, in wanting to understand code and translate code to make it understandable, like what's going on in code, we wanted to base the company's name on a translator, to give credence and respect to the creators. The engineers are doing the work. We just want to be able to interpret it. So SEMA is a shortened and definitely mispronounced version of Lokaksema, Lokaksema, who was a Buddhist monk who brought Buddhism from India to China. So obviously two spectacular cultures and bridging that gap. And so I like telling that story, of course, but especially with someone with an Asia connection. So anyway, great honor to build this business over the last 7 years. We did not, in fact, it would have been very impressive if we had built a business beginning in 2017 about generative AI. The truth is, we've been working on one product from the beginning, a code scan product that, for American listeners, if you buy a house, you get a home inspection, and the home inspection looks at the roof and the plumbing and the electricity and all those different parts, and you do it at a time of buying and selling a house. We've built the code scan to do that about software companies and tech-enabled companies at the time of purchase or sale. So it's used in technical due diligence. We assess everything at once, almost everything: the team, the code quality, the cybersecurity, the intellectual property risk, etc. And so over these 7 years, I'm so honored by our client list. We've done $1 trillion worth of companies for some of the world's best investors. And we've developed some pretty deep expertise in how to synthesize and summarize what is going on with code across all those areas. So we've been working on that now for 7 years. But a year ago, some of those great global organizations, and I will show respect to them by not naming them, said, well, you're good at measuring these parts of the so-called house. Here's another one for you to add. And that one is understanding how coders are using GenAI to code. And so that was the beginning of our GenAI product, which is now, achieved significant market position in this short year, all thanks to our engineers and to our customers who said you should build it. It's such a Everyone out there who's built new products knows what a gift it is for customers to trust you enough to tell you what you should build next. That's the slightly longer version of how we got to generative AI in general and really spending time on generative AI use to code in particular.
Yeah, fascinating. I was actually having coffee this afternoon with the founder of a Chinese startup where their team was initially a foreign team, their engineering team, and now they're transitioning more over to a Chinese team. And they've had all sorts of issues with the code base and so forth. And it was interesting to me listening because this is a team that's maybe 30 people, 20 engineers. And the CEO was really having trouble understanding what was happening in the engineering room. And there's a little microcosm where you'd think in a small company like that, the CEO should kind of know everybody and have a sense of what's going on. You say these people are leaving, the productivity is going down. We basically have two teams working in parallel, and he's trying to do this from gut. He's trying to get a sense, right? And so it's very clear, some kind of dashboard. I know that's probably not the big problem that your customers are facing, right? That's a specific situation, but you can see even for a startup founder how frustrating it can be to not have that visibility into your engineering team.
Couldn't agree more. He or she is not alone. This is definitely not a salesy conversation, but we have a free, absolutely free, anonymous calculator that actually does a pretty good job if you have the data. I know Eric will say it at the end, but you're welcome to go to our website, anyone out there, and just try it and see what your health score is based on 12 simple questions. If you ever want to get a sense of, really how, after 900 scans, all that work, our sort of summary version of how to, to understand the health. So anyone who's out there is welcome to try it. We don't collect emails. We don't even collect the data. Totally anonymous, totally free, totally for listeners that they just want to see what their score would be.
So I'm curious, there's an aspect of this which I'm going to be more familiar with, which is the management aspect, right? And there's a set of use cases around that. And then there's the legal aspect. And I noticed that you have a JD from Harvard, which is quite unusual for the founder of a tech company. And so there's this whole kind of regulatory compliance, legal risk set of use cases, which I personally actually don't think about that often. I'm just not addressing those. But I imagine for a private equity investor, those could be very much top of mind. How much did that play into you founding the company, your legal background?
Yeah, well, first, Eric, absolutely great observation. if you looked at we have a summary, one pager, half pager of the results, and they actually are organized by product risk. If there are those risks, it might make it less likely to be able to deliver the code predictably and continue the roadmap. And there's something we call compliance risks, which I just say things that lawyers get upset about. Could be cyber risk, could be security risk, could be intellectual property risk. And so it's actually called compliance. So you're exactly right to think about that bifurcation. The path from law to this was a bit indirect. I'm so honored to have learned, really, law school was a great training in breaking down complex topics and structuring them in a logical way, frankly, structuring them in an opinionated way to achieve outcomes. I think training of laws was amazing for that. Second, a confidence that logic should prevail. And it was those two general traits that walking into the weekly executive team meeting where the chief sales officer, chief revenue officer had a system of record. The marketing officer had a system of record. What do you mean that the engineering leader, despite being an amazing human, didn't have a system of record? And so, one, the confidence that, well, that's illogical. We're here to fix that illogical problem. And second, the confidence that we can go figure it out, that we can build a logical structure that is defensible to technologists, but also high enough abstracted to make sense to others. So that was really the path. There is a great deal of legal risk in code bases. I would say it most certainly is. CIMA does not give legal advice. What we have done is listen to general counsels and deal teams who say, these are the legal risks we face. Now, please collect data that can help us inform how big that risk is and collect that data and give it to the legal teams. So open source code, for example, of course, helps developers be wildly more productive. In theory, you can just go off and use it. You can just go to a public repository and use that open source code. In reality, all of that code comes with a license. All code comes with licenses. Some of those licenses are very permissive. There's commercial licenses where if you pay for it, you can use it. But some of those licenses are very restrictive. Copyleft is the most common one. And what it says on paper, in bytes, is if you use our code in your product, our code is free, so your code has to be free. So you're copying zero cost, zero price code of them, and you're copying it from the left to your product. That is a massive legal risk as part of due diligences. Our clients told us we need to care about this. You need to track it. So we track the open source risk, and then we turn it over to the lawyers who are, very well qualified to make the final determination of how much risk is actually involved.
Great. I want to get into that Gen AI topic, but just to understand a bit more from the user experience, it sounds like you probably have a set of reports, right? Because you have reporting requirements. And then you also have, I imagine, the need for alerts or to flag information. But then you have quite a range of different potential users, everybody from the CTO, who should be relatively familiar with what's going on, but maybe wants a summary, all the way to maybe a CMO who might be very non-technical, or a legal counsel, again, potentially very non-technical. What does this look like from a user perspective?
So it is fundamentally alert and a SaaS platform. We might build that someday, but we really got first this set of reports. There's just three sets. A summary that is like a credit score. Your credit score went up or down. It's this number. Here's how you fit relative to others. That's called a snapshot. S for short, S for snapshot. H for huge, H for health check. A 100 to 700 page PowerPoint document. All this is automatically generated. That is for the technologist. It is definitely not for the CEO or CMO or whatever. And then detailed worksheets for, especially on the compliance risk. So everybody looks at the executive summary credit score snapshot. Technologists look at the detailed PowerPoint, the health check, and then the legal teams actually do look at the Excel worksheets for the legal risk. Security teams look at the security worksheets. So it's all part of one product, but you're absolutely right. I mean, my God, I was the original use case. I needed, is it good or not? Is it heading in the right direction or not? What areas are hotspots, right? That was the place I wanted to start the conversation. And so other than lawyers, the non-technologists spend almost all their time on the snapshot side.
Gotcha. And then you have these two, I don't know if these are, it sounds like they're new, maybe over the last 12 months or so, these two new products or modules, which are the generative AI code transparency and the generative AI bill of materials. Would love to understand more of the concepts behind those. So maybe first the code transparency. The goal, as I understand, is to measure how much code is created by GenAI. Why is it that important? And then I guess there's probably more to understand around that, maybe not just the volume, but probably some other metrics. So what's actually important to track there?
Amazing. So you did an absolute great job of capturing it. Let's go back to the open source example just for a moment. Open source code is code the team didn't write. It's an incredibly good idea to use it. I mean, if you asked a developer in 2024, do you think you should be using open source? Do you think you're still a developer if you're using open source? They'd look at you like you're nuts. Of course you're a developer. We're just using the best tools available, and our job is to solve problems, and it would be a waste of time to build something that wasn't available, that was already available from open source. So of course we should use it. Because developers, it makes them more productive and they like it using it, it's a massive boom for productivity. We've actually looked for how much more productive it is. It's probably 10x. Developers can, not to pick like a provocative word, but because you don't have to build from the beginning entire frameworks, you could go 10 times faster in certain respects than coders of 30 years ago. That said, open source code, you can see I'm going to make the analogy shortly, comes with risk. We talked about the legal risk that's very real, especially in diligence. There's security risk. Open source code is not fully secure. Of course, no code is fully secure. We're not saying it's bad, but we're saying you have to keep track of it. And so anytime in a diligence situation, but also in ongoing, companies keep track of how much open source they have and make sure it's within range and the code that they are using, the open source code they're using, is being used the right way. Literally, you can swap out every single thing every time I said open source for that last 3 minutes and replace it with GenAI. Is GenAI a good idea to code? Absolutely yes. There's a tiny number of situations where a company, an organization might decide they don't want to use it. We respect that, but all of the meaningful risks are avoidable with good tools and good training. So we really think it is safe to use, and all but you shouldn't be building nuclear arsenal software with it just to be safe. But other than that, it's really safe to use. Almost all developers like it, not all of them, but almost all like it because it makes them more productive. It's a just-in-time partner. It's a way to experiment and prototype quickly, but it comes with risk too. And of course, because it helps do their job, it leads to a massive productivity boost. We're only seeing the beginnings of which. It will probably, in the end, be another 10x improvement, just like open source, maybe even more than that over the years. But it comes with risk. First, GenAI code is less secure. I'm going to say, so is all code. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. It just means you have to be worried about security. GenAI code comes with intellectual property risk. Depending on which tools you use and how you use it, it's a real risk. GenAI code comes with long-term maintainability risk. So audience, think of a colleague at work who shows up to you with a 10-page paper, a memo that you ask them to write, and you say, all right, Stephen, did you write this? I put some prompts, I typed some prompts, and this is what came out. Did you edit it after the fact? No. You would be skeptical. You would be skeptical because it probably is right, but not completely right. GenAI hallucinates. You'd wonder about this person's ability, because you're not just asking for a memo. You'd want this person to understand it well enough to be able to act on it. And so in that example, that fake example, an unadulterated memo would be called pure GenAI. So pure GenAI is it just spits out the results from an LLM. Blending is the act of modifying it, of making it yours. And that is a long way of answering your other question. Not only are we looking at how much GenAI and where is it, but how blended is it? Because it is the blending of it lets you capture all of the benefits while truly eliminating all of those risks. That is actually the one difference to open source, where open source, you keep it safe by keeping those packages updated. So you're not modifying it yourself, you're not blending it, you're just keeping the patches going, keeping the patches updated. Whereas for GenAI, you absolutely need a human in the loop. You need them to modify it, to understand it, to make it contextual, etc. And so GenAI code transparency is one part. How much GenAI is it and where? But the second part, how blended versus pure is it? And it's the combination of those two factors that really help companies, help organizations take advantage of GenAI while mitigating the risks.
I'm curious around there's a lot of GenAI tools, everything from ChatGPT, right? I imagine most developers are not using ChatGPT, but everything from that to GitHub or more specialized tools. And I guess they all have different risk profiles. Do you track that? And I don't want to call out any companies and kind of put them on the spotlight here, but do you have a very clear understanding that product X has this risk profile and product Y has a lower or a higher risk profile based on the way that the toolkit and the way that it generates code?
I'm going to give you a half answer. The half that I'm not going to answer is to say there are a large number of extremely good tools, of GenAI tools. In fact, developers do use ChatGPT as well. Many development teams let their developers use more than one because some of them are fit for purpose for different tasks. So many different companies have extremely good GenAI tools. The risk comes from picking the right tier of those tools. And pro tip, and I really hope everyone listening, please go have a conversation with your legal team and your CTO as soon as possible. It's incredibly important that your developers are using, and frankly, everyone at the company is using a tier of the LLM tool that is business or pro or enterprise and does not retrain on what you are putting in. And that is fundamentally important to protect the trade secret version of intellectual property of your company, because otherwise it is sort of the equivalent of posting your code on Stack Overflow or on the internet. It could be reused. So I really can't stress this enough. Please give your developers, everybody who wants to use LLMs, at least one tool at the right tier and help them understand. Like, if you wouldn't post it on LinkedIn, whatever you're doing, you should not be posting it. Even questions, right? We're thinking of entering this market. We need to solve this problem, right? Those are business secrets too. Do not use a tier of a product where they guarantee that they're not going to retrain based on your inputs.
Yeah, I mean, here in China, I imagine, I don't know, maybe you don't have so many users here, but the cloud adoption is quite a bit lower and the trust level is quite a bit lower. So we really see that and risk aversion quite extreme here, where even if it's the Microsoft Azure version of OpenAI and their cloud services are all on Microsoft, they might still hesitate about using GenAI through that because we trust Microsoft, but how much do we trust them with certain data sets?
And I'd say for folks, at that level of skepticism, and they're not alone, military grade applications around the world have that, then I'd say, so first principles, GenAI and the SDLC can make your developers at least 10, probably 20% more effective today. If once it's rolled out at scale and developers are using it and it's not forced on them, but they've gotten the chance to use it, et cetera. For most organizations, if you could get 10 to 20% more productivity, that is so spectacularly valuable that you should act accordingly. Acting accordingly in certain countries might mean just going and buying a Copilot license, whatever. Acting accordingly in certain other industries and other countries might mean go buy a private set up one for yourself. And so certainly there are private LLMs that can then be purpose-built for making coding improvements. I just encourage everyone to do that math. Every organizational leader, if what is the value of 10 to 20% productivity gain, the cost would be higher if you have to put in a private LLM that is not available to the outside world. But there are, I'm going to make a wild guess, 20,000 companies in China and probably 30,000 organizations for whom the ROI would be clear enough to go put in private models, given how valuable it would be for your developers to have that kind of boost.
Yeah, and I can imagine this type of tool being really valuable for their conversations, because I don't think this analysis is coming out of really a deep assessment of the risk. I think it's coming out of a lack of kind of a visibility into the risk and just saying, we don't understand it, therefore let's not act, right? And so having a tool that can provide a kind of a structured visibility and a way to communicate to the legal team, communicate to headquarters about risk profile, let people know that it's being tracked, I think would really be helpful there.
And sorry, well, just to say it, we've written a bunch of white papers. So we could not be more supportive of using GenAI code. You should know our biases. Everyone should know your biases when you're talking to somebody. Our white papers reflect it. We try to be objective, but we are most certainly an independent voice. And so we're certainly happy to share them. They're on the website. People can contact us. We are happy to make introductions to sales leaders at leading LLMs who can explain why their tools are safe. And certainly, every organization has to make its own decisions, but certainly in the United States, not only would I bet my company, I have bet my company that there are enterprise grade tools that you can trust with your most important secrets and would have no risk, would have no personal concern about recommending them. Obviously, it's a country by country decision, but if folks want to read the white papers, reach out. If folks want introductions to the LLM sales teams, you let me know.
If you're still listening, then you must take technology seriously. So I'd like to introduce you to our case study database. Think of it as a roadmap that can help you understand which use cases and technologies are being deployed in the world today. We have cataloged more than 9,000 case studies and are adding 500 per month with detailed tagging by industry and function. Our goal is to help you make better investment decisions that are backed by data. Check it out at the link below, and please share your thoughts. We'd love to hear how we can improve it. Thank you, and back to the show.
One more aspect of the risk profile that I'm really interested in your thoughts on is the topic of data. So training, what data do you use to train an algorithm? So this topic of developing code, but also what databases do we put there? This is certainly relevant for putting anything on the cloud. I think a lot of companies, even at least the companies that we're working with, even on premise, there's kind of question marks about merging data sets. Often data is siloed. Maybe it's an inefficiency, but there's, to some extent, sometimes some logic around siloing it so that the pool of users is smaller. Do you measure the risk related to databases that would be used to train an algorithm?
That's a really good question. We do not do that today for this product. On the relationship of training data to risks for GenAI coding, so that's an area we know a little bit about. In theory, there is a risk that code of basically copyright infringement. So if I work at Acme Corporation and Acme Corporation was using LLM Inc., from a company called LLM Inc., and they were training on data that, in theory, LLM Inc. could face copyright infringement claims from the creators of the training data. We're in fact seeing that today with lawsuits against some of the major providers, LLM providers, not just on code, but in other areas. What I'm about to say is not legal advice, so do not take anything I'm saying without a strong conversation with your counsel. CIMA assesses the risk of copyright infringement claims to Acme Co. for using an LLM to code as extremely low. One reason is it's a very disparate set. There are millions of potential targets. There are millions of organizations who are using LLMs to code. And so the training set provider, it's one thing to go after the LLM, of which there's a handful, but to go after all the users of the LLMs is a very disparate path. Second reason, if you use the right enterprise tier of the LLM, they put in indemnification for proper use. And so that's another big reason. We still think the loss at risk is extremely small. Again, not legal advice. And I'll end it with the folks who are bringing these claims are open source community members. And I would always, 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 always recommend that organizations be good